You're welcome. So, I haven't taught this class in a while, so I was actually excited to teach it. So, the premise of it first started was A to Z is what we called it, and then client to close, keys with ease. The summary of what this class is all about is like setting expectations. We've had experienced agents come in here and sit through this class and walk out with kind of a bit of a deer in headlights going, what? I'm not doing those things. I'm not following those steps. We get very busy, or we're taught the wrong things. We're bad habits. If you started here, you don't have bad habits. If you came from somewhere else, you could too. I'm not saying that you do. But it's kind of a refresher to keep our mind, keep our head in check, keep our skills sharpened for when we're out there in the field working with buyers and sellers. I don't care if you're 15, 18 years like I am in the business or brand new, this class is relevant to everything that we're doing day to day. So again, the summary of it is when you have that buyer and you have that seller, what are the correct steps to get to closing with ease, to make it as smooth as we can. We know that every transaction is different. We have hiccups that we hit. You have sometimes the worst deal on planet Earth, and really there's not much we could have done as agents except control our actions, control our steps, control what we do, so that at the end the client says, you know what, that really was a tough one, but if I didn't have you, I don't think I'd have gotten through the whole deal. Because I think most buyers and sellers know and truthfully understand that we're working hard and doing our best, and that there's certain people in a transaction that can foul it up. But as opposed to us blaming or pointing or going what can we do as agents to do our best to mitigate that risk, or to minimize how it feels to your client, so that they're not a stress case at the end. This is a stressful process for a lot of people, and sometimes we have to put ourselves in their shoes the best way we can to ultimately empathize with the situation that they're in. And you get a perfect buyer or a perfect seller. Sometimes it's done it 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times, whatever it is, and it's a breeze, But remember, up on the screen are just the major bullet points of a transaction, which is my checklist. When I was in production, which I'm not anymore, and when I first started in 2001, I had a different entry into this business. To give you a little background, I went to Chicago for 3 years, and I was on an internship there. I worked for a real estate, mortgage, and title company. And things are done a little differently in Chicago, so I learned kind of the cutthroat way to do real estate. And they called this the Wild Wild West because we're escrow closing state. There really is no room for error there. You have attorneys, you have, it's a different buyer, it's just a different environment. But I was scared, so my mentor was awesome. I had to checklist everything that I did, from getting up in the morning to work, to leaving, to going to bed. Like, he was very, very strict, somewhat, I hate the word Nazi, but that's kind of how he was. I felt like I was being forced to do certain things a certain way, but again, I look back on it and I go, to get belly to belly, because that is where the relationship is created, and that is where I can truthfully set the expectation, set the stage. So what I had was my own little checklist. It was kind of like my resume, and the resume was, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And again, everyone's is different. Mine was basically, I'm going to show up on time, I'm going to negotiate, I'm going to make sure that when I'm available for you to show properties when you need to, you are going to sign a buyer-broker exclusive agreement, but there's also stipulations to that for both of us. Because to me, the buyer-broker exclusive agreement isn't that. I call it a commitment to excellence. That was really what it was. And it was for both of us. If I'm going to commit to you, you have to commit to me. So a lot of times the buyer-broker is just explained wrong. They put this buyer-broker exclusive and say, my broker needs this signed in order to work together. And already they think they have to pay you something, or you're locking into some agreement. I do the flip, right? This is my commitment. This is my commitment to excellence. This is my contract with you, explaining what I do as an agent and what you can expect of me, but also in turn what I expect of you. If you're going to expect me as an agent to show you property, to take time and not get paid, and search properties and go 110%, because that's what I give all my clients, all that I ask in turn is that when you buy, you're going to work with me. However, if I don't show up, if I don't negotiate right, if I drop the ball, if I'm not professional, if I don't do in my resume what I say I'm going to do, you can fire me. You know, like what Russell Shaw says, you know, if you don't like me, fire me. But truthfully, that way it's a two-way street. I have to uphold my end of the bargain, my commitment to excellence, but also I expect them to as well. You know, again, it's all about expectations up front. The reason why either someone's upset or pissed off at closing is because someone didn't set the proper expectations of what possibly could happen and what's to be expected of one another. And that is so big when you're sitting in that buyer consultation for the buyer broker exclusive agreement, because that is where you get to shine. Like, yes, you're committing to me, but I'm also committing back to you, if not more than you are to me. You don't ever have to buy a home. You don't pay me anything. I don't get paid. I don't get paid. Unless you buy a home, I don't make a dime. This is my time. This is my job. This is my livelihood. So all that you're saying is that I'm going to follow these steps. I'm going to show you homes. I'm going to be available. I am going to work 24/7 for you as a client, as an agent, to be certain that I find you the right home and the right process. Because we should. We want to give them Class A service. But that's not to be confused with you get trampled on. They can't just go and do whatever they want. You can fire them too. You know, again, I'm not going to say that in a buyer consultation, but it's to be implied with the commitment of excellence. I expect this of you. You expect this of me. It's a partnership. And then when that elephant's out of the room, now it's on to business. They are going to respect you, number one, because you've given them your resume. You've told them what I am going to do in this transaction. You've literally set the stage now that I am the pro. You listen to me, you know, because we have to lead the transaction too. It's important that we lead the transaction and not get led by them, because they will run you in circles. They will trample on you, and we don't need that. This is supposed to be a respectful. Just like, you know, I'm not going to go into that person's place of work and run them rampant, you know. But again, I am one of those guys that I'll tell you up front how it is and how it's supposed to be and what's to be expected, as opposed to dance around the bush. Just like I want them to know what I make, because at the end I want them to say you need to make more. You should have made more because you worked so hard. I'm never scared to hand them the pre-audit, which is this pre-settlement statement in closing, to see the 3% or whatever it is in there. I'm never scared. Never have been in my life. You know, a lot of times some people are like, maybe they're scared because they didn't do a good job, you know. So once you've gone through the buyer consultation, you've got the buyer broker exclusive signed, then you can start talking pre-approval. You know, again, I'm not trying to lock them into anything, but I want to get the ugly stuff. I like to say, get the hard stuff out of the way first of the day, and then the rest of the day is a breeze. Get the hard stuff out of the way. Get those ugly conversations out of the way, which it's really not an ugly conversation, but it's the nerve-wracking one, especially if you haven't done it before. So now the pre-approval process. I'm not taking a family member or a friend even anywhere. We're not going to waste time unless you've talked to a lender, consulted with somebody, and I know your financial situation, at least that you'll be able to buy a home. I'm just not going to do it. I've so many times in the past have I been burned, and it's never by a random person. It's always a friend who's like, yeah, I'm good, bro, I'm good, you know, and then you find them the home, you go under contract, they're not good, you know, because you trusted them to tell you that they're pre-approved. And it's not that you don't trust the person. You need to know their financial situation for a couple reasons. First reason is you have to make sure you know for negotiating power. If I'm going to go into up against all the cash buyers that we have now, I have to have the strongest approval possible by one of my lenders. I have to have that strong approval in order to even be considered. You know, not that every deal has a cash offer, but there's a lot of cash offers out there right now. It's just happening. Low inventory, strong buyers, great economy, that's just the way it is. But that doesn't mean you're going to lose out to another cash buyer. So what do? You have make sure your buyer, when I say pre-approval, I mean a true pre-approval. Income, credit, assets, bank statements, everything. I want a full underwritten file. Literally. Full underwritten file for my pre-approval. Short of the appraisal, everything else should be looked at. That is a non-negotiable item. Any person that gives you pushback and doesn't want to do it probably isn't somebody you should be working with. It's a bye-bye. Because there's either something they're not telling you, or maybe they're self-employed, or maybe they know they have a complicated situation. Who knows why they would try to throw at the wall and see if it sticks. But every single month it happens. 2 days prior to close of escrow, We get an agent that calls us, one of our agents, my buyer got denied by their loan. I don't know what to do. What do I do? Nothing. I can't help you, and neither can you, because your client or the loan officer absolutely dropped the ball. Because a loan officer, their job is to be able to tell you yes, but they also should be able to tell you no quick. You know, there's just too many variables in the transaction. They need to be able to be honest and say, you know, no. But just because it's a no doesn't mean they're not going to give a checklist, a punch list of what needs to be done. And also, I want them to share that with me so I know what needs to be done with my client, so I can get them out in the car again and start looking, or get them out in the car, period, and start looking. This is one of those things I still can't believe that we fail as an industry to literally master. Why can't we master the pre-approval process? I don't know. And it's every single month. There is somebody here in the brokerage or outside the brokerage, if we have the listing, that we get a call and the buyer can't perform. And something as simple as income, my gosh, that should never be the conversation. But that's what happens. Because somebody, and usually it's bigger institutions, they do what's called a credit approval. They go to their bank, they get a credit approval, they look at a couple things, and they move on, and they issue them their approval. But on that pre-approval, again, why I want an AAR standard pre-approval, because on those boxes, if I get an offer, I have a listing, and I see an offer come over, and not every box is checked yes, I'm not going to even look at the offer. I'm going to tell my client, yeah, it's an offer, but we're not going to entertain this offer. We're going to look at these other ones because this guy or gal had their credit pulled. That's not enough. You know, maybe back in 2005, 6, and 7, when you can fog a mirror, it was acceptable, but not now. So again, these are the little things that sometimes we don't forget. When we have a listing and we get that offer the first time, we're super excited. We got an offer. It's full purchase price, but full purchase price doesn't mean anything if they can't close. You know, and it goes with cash too. These cash buyers are loose. If they're cash buyers, you have to be cautious too. Proof of funds need to be prior to acceptance. Like, seriously, we're not accepting your loan, your contract until we have proof of funds. Earnest money must be submitted to title within 24 hours. If it's not, I'm going to send you a cure notice. These are things that don't get done every single day. You have to be on your game here. Again, part of this setting expectations is also expectations, what we expect for you as agents as well. Because these little things that you can do are going to eliminate a pissed off buyer or a pissed off seller. You know, that happened last month. There's nothing worse than you get a offer, you accept it, you'll get the proof of funds, the agent says, we'll send it to you tomorrow. Tomorrow goes by, the next day goes by. You don't realize earnest money hasn't been deposited at escrow. No one cures them. They cancel after the 10 days. It happened last month. There's no earnest money to take. Well, we're going after the earnest money. What earnest money? You didn't cure them. It's not entitled. And you cannot, absolutely, and you cannot force them to deposit escrow money now. You can't. It happened last month. It's shocking. The stuff that happens is shocking, and all of it can be prevented. I'm not the guy to tell you the horror stories of what happens, but truthfully, these are the things that we see, and a lot of it is preventable. Most of it actually is. So that first process, that first moment of pre-approval, to me, is the most crucial part of the whole deal. So pre-approval process, we have plenty of great partners here at my home group that can get you the best pre-approval possible. You guys know who they are. One of them sitting back in the room now. One of them sitting back in right now, Jim Zabo. We've got Gil. We've got great partners that are here to make sure you don't fall into these situations. Or if you have the listing and a pre-approval comes over, send it over to them. Have them try to get a second look on it, just to be certain that you got a buyer that can buy the house. I mean, in a personal situation, it happened recently on Jeremy's stepbrother, where he had the listing and the buyer came in. Here we thought we had approval, we were good to go, right? Nope. A couple days prior to close of escrow, buyer's loan fell through because the underwriter got the hold of the tax returns and there was depreciated income on there. Didn't qualify. The Wells Fargo. So it wasn't like it was, you know. Now, in hindsight, going backwards, if I'd have seen the Wells Fargo, I'd have said, Jim, or somebody, look at this. Can we get a package looked at? Well, ended up we had VIP look at it. VIP looked at it and said, if I'd have seen this up front, we would have told you right away there's issues. And again, not my buyer. We had the seller. You know, it was Jeremy's stepbrother. But there's nothing we could have done there. So again, I'm not even in production and I see this crap still, you know?
That fell out again, twice?
Yeah, well, he closed finally, but after the third buyer. Okay, so again, just because it's great and the market's hot and we're moving and shaking, it doesn't mean we can't put our guard down. We just can't put our guard down. Follow the checklists and the steps. They're there for a reason, to eliminate and stop these crappy things from happening. It's annoying, it's frustrating. So once you have the pre-approval done with your buyer, what's the next step? The next step is finally looking for a home. But before we go out there, I want to truthfully hear and listen to my buyer's needs and wants. What's their wish list? I call it the wish list. The must-haves and the don't wants. It's not really the best grammar, but it's the truth. You know, we don't listen enough to buyers. We don't listen enough to sellers to truthfully what they want. We find out how much they're qualified for, the area they're looking to buy, and we go. How about ask the buyer where they came from? Are they from out of town? Ask them the home they had before this, if we didn't know what it was. Find out truthfully what their style is. If they're from the Midwest, they're probably going to have a tough time with homes here because there's block walls up, where in the Midwest you don't have that. You know, if they're from the East Coast, they're used to big yards and grass and that. So the reason why is because buyers absolutely recognize when you're paying attention. They know the fast-paced agent that's looking for a paycheck, that's going to want to put you in the portal, let the portal do the work, send you the ones that come active every day, tell me when you're ready to look and go. That is absolutely not the way to be an agent. You know, it doesn't mean you can't utilize technology. You want to utilize the portal. You want to make sure you put them on the auto, everything. They need to be on that. But that is not going to stop. People are entering listings in the MLS. There's user error, right? If they're entering listings and someone makes a mistake, I've seen a mistake in McDowell Mountain Ranch. They abbreviated McDowell Mountain Ranch as a subdivision. MLS doesn't catch that. So if you abbreviate McDowell Mountain Ranch and someone goes and searches subdivisions of McDowell Mountain Ranch, that listing's not going to pop up. The only reason why it popped up is because I, at the time, was doing a personalized search. I was looking by city and zip code and style of home, and it popped up. But I did call the agent and go, just so you know, you probably don't want to abbreviate McDowell Mountain Ranch if someone's searching by subdivision, and that is the most popular search if someone wants to be in a specific subdivision. So not only am I listening now, I've listened to I've done a couple things. Number one, I've made them respect me by creating a commitment together. I've met with them in person. I've taken that time. And now I'm listening to their wish list. So before we've even gotten in the car, this agent's going to love who you are. They're going to truthfully think of you as a professional, somebody who cares about their job, and they're going to want to use you and refer you to everybody because you're not the typical real estate agent that's out there that we all know that exists. And it's the one, find the one you want, tell me, I'll get you in. You know, that just doesn't work anymore. That doesn't show the value, especially when we have conversations of downward commission and all the pressure that's saying that commission is going to get lower and lower and lower. It hasn't really happened yet, but if it's something on the horizon, we have to be doing this. We have to show our worth and our value more than we ever have in our career. And when we do that, there's not going to be an issue asking for 6% on the listing or getting 3% on the buy side. You won't ever have that issue. Believe it or not, there's a study that the Association of Realtors took that buyers and sellers are willing to pay the price. They just want a competent agent. They're so sick of the low barrier of entry to get a real estate license and the morons that are out there. It's just the truth, you know. I mean, I hate saying that, but I'll be the one to say it. It's just there's too many morons in our business because they're not coming to training. They're not taking advantage of the brokerage and what they're doing. They think that they know it all, they get a license, and they're going. And I respect the fact that they're hustling and they want to do it, but you have to take a moment to pump the brakes and learn the business, learn the transaction. You need to feel it, touch it, and go through the whole thing start to finish before you should even hire a transaction coordinator, in my opinion. So when you've got that wish list set, now you know 3-bedroom, 2-bath, you know all these things. Why? Because let's say this person does not want to be on a busy street, just for an example. And you let the auto portal pull this up. The auto portal is going to miss that stuff, the automatic search. And if you go send them a house that is perfect, but it backs a street, and they get there, and you back the street, you've wasted their time, you've wasted your time, and suddenly they're pissed. You know, that happens a lot, you know, because you're not paying attention. When we don't pay attention to our clients' needs, just like with a seller too, same thing goes. When we're not paying attention to their wants, their needs, and everything that they need in the house they're buying or the house they're trying to sell, you've wasted time, and it just starts to add up and build up for them, and that's where frustration shows. But I've seen it happen so many times where we're not listening, or they say truthfully, I have to have a pool, and we show them homes without a pool, or we're trying to fit them into a home because we're trying to sell them a house. Like they know that too. Like, I want to buy a house, yes, but it has to fit my needs. I have to truthfully want to be here. And why should they not? If I was buying a house, if I want a pool, I want a pool, you know? Or if I don't want to back a major street because I have kids, I'm not going to back a major street. If I want a fireplace because I'm from the Midwest, I'm going to find my client a fireplace, you know? There is going to be a time, though, when we can't fit the exact parameters into a search and find the home. But guess what? That's after you've looked at all that. You've gone through all the frogs. You've kissed all the frogs. Now it could be like, look, buyer, we've been looking for a month, and I know that you want a pool. I know that it can't back a major street, but here's what I found. I found a house that has a pool, and it backs a side street. Is that something maybe you want to look at as opposed to a major street? Again, just examples. They're going to appreciate that because you're paying attention to what their needs lists are. And sometimes it would work, but at least you can go out there with them, see if it's too busy or whatever it is, the scenario is, and then they can make a decision. But you're giving them the option up front as opposed to sending them a list of 12 properties, none of them fit their parameters, and they're just getting frustrated. So the other thing too is I like to preview. I'm a previewer. I like to go to the house, preview the home before the client, or I show the client. And a lot of agents now, they chuckle because they're like, that's so old school. I'm like, it's absolutely not old school. In fact, previewing a home is another way to show your client how good you are and how much you truthfully care about the transaction and about them finding the right place. When you walk into a home and say, I was here yesterday and you're going to love this, this, and this about the property. Or how about this scenario? You go preview 6 of the 10 homes because you can't get into 4 of them, but you can get into 6 of them. And you say, hey, look, I know you want this in this home. I went to this property. It's not an HOA. And the guy was across the street cutting wood in his garage. It was loud as hell. Thought you should know that before we go look at it. I'm glad you said that because you know what? I don't want to go check it out anymore. Those are the little things. It's the little things in a transaction. It's the little things with our clients that they pay attention to because you're paying attention to the details. And when you can save them time and something they didn't truthfully want to see before you go, you just look like a hero. I mean, I know this is like elementary, but it's true. You just look and feel like a hero to your client now because you're truthfully paying attention, setting the expectation. So again, everyone's style is different. I personally love to search for homes daily because I want to have my thumb on the pulse. I wanted to see what was going on. So again, combo them all. At least even if they're on auto drip, go on there yourself too and look and just make sure, because it's nice that you actually get to send a property to somebody and say, I know this didn't pop in the search, but I found this. Again, showing them that you're working. Show them that you are on the ball. You're paying attention to what's going on. So fast forward a little bit. When a home is identified, one of my favorite processes is, your cap, I'll get it for you. One of my favorite processes is the negotiation and finding the home. There you go. Because that's kind of really where we get to shine and show them that we're really good at what we do. So the negotiation process to me is fun. It's also, again, where my skills show through. So what I see happen a lot now when we're writing offers, preparing offers, submitting offers via email, there's no more conversation. I mean, I don't know how many people here, does everybody here pick up the phone and have a conversation with the agent before you send an offer? I hope. Yeah, good. Because, and if you don't, that's okay, now you can start doing it. So what happens a lot is we're all busy and we find the property, we run the comps, we prepare the offer, we put it in the email, we say, find the attached offer, confirm receipt, right? And before we even had a conversation. What if our offer's too low? What if there's special terms? What if anything in the scenario with the buyer you want to explain? Again, elementary. I know you're looking at me going, why are we having this conversation? It's because this is the stuff I see on a daily basis that people fail to do. And I like to make sure the seller knows my buyer's scenario and the listing agent knows my buyer's scenario, and vice versa. I want to find out theirs too, because I want to give the listing agent a win. I want to give them a win before I've even gotten down to brass tacks and sending them an offer. I want them to feel like they can go back to their client with intel, you know? And it may be something as simple as, you know, the close of escrow date is not the important thing to them. And maybe it's something along the lines of, you know, which the buyer's probably already told to say is, you know, this is our starting point. There is some wiggle. You know, them going back to their client and saying, look, here's their starting point. I know where they're at. I know that we can get them up, right? Just a little win before the negotiation process. Because there's so many times where we get started on the wrong foot with another agent. I get it. There's a lot of ego and arrogance in real estate. The experienced ones have to tell you how many years they've been in the business. Well, Mark, I've been in this business for 10 years. Well, great. That doesn't mean anything to me. You know, wonderful. You've been in the business 10 years. Thank you for telling me. Am I supposed to tell my client now too? But the reason they do it is because they feel like they're the ones. We can't control their actions. We absolutely can control how we are. We can control how we act. We can control the smile on our face, the tone of our voice, and how we act and conduct ourselves as a real estate agent. So when I call up and say, hello, Mr. and Mrs. Agent. My name is Mark Hutchins with my home group. I'm calling you on your property on 80th Place. I wanted to let you know I'll be submitting an offer. And before I do so, I just wanted to give you a little background on my buyer and maybe find out what's important to your seller. So if I need to edit something or tweak something on my offer, I can do it before I send it over so that we look good and we have we start on the right foot with your client. That literally opens the flow of communication. Suddenly this agent that maybe was a hard ass that you've noticed before is suddenly the nicest person you've ever met. And I can't tell you how many times those conversations where you think that person's, you know what, suddenly you guys are best friends and you can't wait to do deals with each other. It's about controlling your actions. That's all it has to do with. And they may still be rude. They may still tell you how many years they've been in the business. They may still tell you that I've done this 100 times before, Mark, and they're wrong, but they've done it 100 times before. But we have to control how we are. I don't even feed into it. I don't feed into it for a second. Fine, that's great. Look, I just want to make sure you have a win. I want to make sure your client's happy. If there's anything I can do to make the transaction smooth and easy for us, I'm here to help you do it. After a couple conversations, you break down that wall with them, and suddenly, again, like you're out at happy hour having drinks, high-fiving each other. So, and now, when I send an offer, I've had a conversation, they expect it. But I tell them too, once you hang up the phone, I have an offer prepared. I never, ever, ever call them, unless there's a reason to ask the question or there's something I need to find out first. I never, ever call and saying I have an offer to submit unless I have an offer to submit. You guys ever had a listing and they're like, hey, I called, we showed probably, I think I got an offer I'm sending you. You never get the offer, so you tell your seller, hey, got a call. And then the seller is asking you every day until you basically say, I don't know what's going on, they've gone dead. That's the worst. I hate that because you tell your seller you're expecting an offer, then you never get the offer. I never tell my seller that until I know for sure. So I like to expect the same. So when I call in, I do the same thing. I have an offer, it's prepared. What do I need to tweak on the offer to make it better, to make your client give you a win? And before I hang up the phone, I say, you'll have my email, your offer in your inbox in 5 minutes. And I do. And I do what I say. One thing in every transaction, I do what I say. Always mind your P's and Q's with that. It's very easy to get caught up in it, and we don't know exactly. Never ever commit or say anything that we know for a fact we're not going to be able to do or follow through with. So when I send the email, that's also with purpose. You guys ever got an email that's just the forward, it's just the subject line is just FWD, and you're like, what is this? And you have to scroll down, you got to open the attachment, there's no anything. You know, maybe these are just my pet peeves, but these are the things that I see in the transaction that just make things easier for somebody. Just make it easier for the person on the other end of the line. You know, so if they are forwarding your email, at least you don't look like an idiot in your email. You know, saying hello, introducing yourself to them, thanking them for their time on the phone. It was great talking to you. You look forward to putting a transaction together, and please confirm receipt of the email and tell them what's attached. You know, that way, if I'm a listing agent, I'm looking at it and I see you have the purchase contract, the agency disclosure, the HOA addendum, but you don't have the prequal. I can respond and say, hey, you forgot the prequal. Mistakes happen. That's the thing. We all know that. So I can respond quick and say, I got your offer. Thanks. But there's no prequal attached. Before I present this to my seller, which I'm always going to do, I need to have prequal. So again, the etiquette that we have in the transaction also sets the expectation for the other agent involved too. It's not just about our client, it's about being an all-star to the other agent too. I always made sure I impressed the other agent. I can either rub off on them, but they can never talk bad about me now, right? That guy was just really good at what he does. You know, it's like, I mean, you can't talk crap about that. You know, you can't get hassled because you did a really good job. But again, I can control that on my end. I can control how I am as an agent. So once I've submitted the offer over, I always tell the listing agent too, like, you know, before you counter, if there's something specific in it, let me know. Right, maybe we can work through it together. I like to me, the phone call negotiation, it's like, you know, the show $1 Million Listing and stuff where, you know, it's a little bit fake how they're going back and forth, but there is some real to that. Like, you know, you can save so many counter forms and so many back and forth emails by a simple conversation. So many times, like, I get my counter offer back, which is inevitable. You're gonna get a counter back, especially today, unless you gave them your cash offer, full purchase price offer, and you're gonna, you know, do whatever they want kind of thing. They're gonna accept your offer. Expect a counter and let your client know we're gonna expect a counter offer. When that counter offer comes back and you review it, before I review it with my client, I pick up the phone and I call the agent. First thing I do is thank them for a counter offer, because a lot of times we don't get them now, they reject it, or I just wanted to thank you for your counter offer, and please thank your seller for the counter offer. We really appreciate that. Is it okay if I review this with you for a couple minutes? Do you have a moment to talk? And they're always going to say yes. 99 times out of 100, they're not going to tell you no. If they do, they're just a jerk, whatever. But can we discuss it for a moment? Absolutely. Let's do a little role play. It's $200,000 house. My client made an offer at $180,000. Let's say my buyer will go up to $190,000. I know that, right? Seller counters back probably at $195,000, right? They come off $5,000. I came in $20,000. I know that they're going to go up a little more, my buyer. The reason I want to have the conversation is, okay, I got your offer, your counter offer, thank you very much. I can tell you where my buyer's at. You don't have to tell them your buyer will go to $190,000, but you could tell them they'll go to $188,000. You could tell them they're willing to come up more. You don't have to say an exact number. Look, I know my buyer is going to come up. I know I can get them up more. Where are we at with your seller? Let's now talk truthfully the important pieces of the puzzle for your client. Is it money? Is it the true net? Is it close of escrow? Is it not paying closing costs? Is it not paying for the home warranty? Is it using your title company? You know, that's when you can start having those conversations. Again, ways to give the seller and the listing agent another win. Just simple open lines of communication. I mean, and a lot of the times too, it is something like that. It's not always about the bottom line. It's not always about the true net. Sometimes it's about the terms. Like, I just don't like a 60-day escrow. Can you shore that up a little bit? You know, or I'm not working with such and such title company. It's not happening. Or I'm not paying $2,000 in closing costs. I'm not paying for the home warranty. Again, we don't know this stuff until we have conversations with them and discuss it, because we do it all through email. We don't have discussions anymore. It's frustrating, because what usually happens is the counteroffer comes, you review with your buyer says, well, screw them, I'm only coming up $2,000. You prepare the counteroffer, you submit it, and you send it over to the other agent. Without even a conversation now, there's 2 counteroffers that have gone out, and we've wasted that time. Where we could typically be done. We could already be done. Seriously, like, I've seen 9 counteroffers. 9. And I'm not kidding. Ask John. It's for $1,000. It's for a home warranty. It's changing the title company. Pick up the phone, dude. Pick up the phone. So it's just like, you know, come on. I mean, we're trying to get a deal put together, you know, but we're also trying to make it smooth. And what's more frustrating to a buyer or a seller than signing 1 million counteroffers? And by that 9th one, they hate each other. They haven't even met each other yet. They're physically like, I hate this buyer. I hate this seller. I mean, what a jerk. You know, then what happens at that point? Now you haven't even gotten to the Binzer yet. Good luck getting anything done. Good luck getting credits. You gotta I dread the Binzer at that point. You've done 9 counteroffers and you haven't even gotten to the Binzer. Oh, I'd be pissed. So, you know, again though, that's all about communication and setting the expectation. Set the expectation up front. Set the communication lines. Open them up. Believe it or not, most people are willing to talk, you know. Clearly I like to talk, but I mean, you know, people like to, you know, go and discuss it. And you do create relationships. It's a relationship business for us with buyers and sellers, but it's also a relationship business with other agents. What if they don't want to work the West Valley? What if they don't want to work Scottsdale? What if there's a client that, you know, who are they going to call? They're going to call the agent they like the most. Sometimes it's not even their friend agent. It's the agent that they had a cross sale with that they know is kick-ass and that they're going to take care of their client, and you're going to get a referral fee. So it's a small business. It's a small world. Relationships is not just putting your hand across that. It's on all sides. Relationship with our vendors, relationships with our clients, relationships with other agents. Super, super important. So the next puzzle here is COE, because that over the last 3 years that's changed a lot. When the whole MDIA thing came with lending guidelines and timeframes, those have gotten better, so they can close quicker. But I still do not rush my lender ever. Well, or I tell people not to. I really haven't worked with a buyer in a while. I'd like to brush my skills up and see how good I really am. But I never rush the lender or my vendors, ever. They always love working with me, and they always said it. And guess what? My files always got done first, always. Because I was never the guy going, where are you at, where are you at, where are you at, where are we at, where are we at, where are we at. I let them do their job. Why? Because it was all on a timeline. I had my timeline set for my buyer. I had a timeline set with the lender and my vendors. We all ran off the same checklist. I was very, very, very organized. They all knew how I do business, but there was never a question. I didn't question them. They didn't question me. We only talked when there was an issue. That's it. That's it. It was that simple to do business because I set my expectations up front on how I do it, and they, same thing with them, and what I expected from each other, what we both expected from each other. So with a close of escrow, it's super important because whenever you rush somebody to do something, mistakes happen. It's inevitable. It's always when a file is rushed, it's when mistakes happen. It's just going to happen. They're trying to push to get something through that probably shouldn't get through. They're missing something when they draw the closing documents, or God knows the million things that can happen when someone's rushed. Never rush an underwriter. Ever rush an underwriter. Underwriters play God, and they do it for a reason because, you know, they sit behind a desk and don't talk to anybody. You know, they're poor souls. But they also have a really difficult job. They have to be very, very, very detail-oriented. And when you rush them, they get pissed, and they'll push back, and suddenly your condition list is a little longer. I'm serious. Not like they're creating stuff out of thin air, but, you know, if an underwriter has a painted picture of a scenario in a file and it's put together well, the loan officer does their job, they're not being rushed. They look at the close of escrow. Believe it or not, underwriters look at the close of escrow. They know when it is. They looked at, you know, it's not in 3 days and they're getting a file. Those are the things that truthfully help them make their decision and help them make a better decision and not be cautious of the buyer. Well, why are they trying to push this? Well, why is this? You know what I'm saying? Those things start to pop up as an underwriter or in a transaction if we don't give them time and package up a good, clean deal. So I'll go over a timeline of close of escrow and why I prefer the longer one, or at least 45 days. I'll get that when we talk more about timeframes at the end. But there is a reasoning behind it. There's a reasoning as far as what we have to disclose, what the lender has to disclose, our time frames that we have to abide by. We can't close by a certain time. All these things now play to the piece of the puzzle when closing a buyer's transaction, or again on the sellers if we're on the seller side too. So moving forward to after close of escrow is the follow-up to everything. You know, proactivity goes a million miles. I think everybody knows that in real estate. I don't have to say that, but when we're proactive with follow-up, that's huge. We tend to be in a reactionary business. We react to issues as opposed to be on top of it. Let people know ahead of time. Give them a status update for Christ's sake. You know, give them the weekly LSU. Let them know what's happening or not happening. Like sometimes an update is no news. That's okay. Just want to give you an update. Nothing's changed. We're still in underwriting or whatever the heck the update is. But give that update. Let people know where we're at in the transaction. If you have news, don't withhold it. It only festers and gets worse. It abscesses by the end. If there's news that needs to come out, it's an awful term, but it's true. It's an explosion at the end. But when we don't deal with issues when they're supposed to be dealt with, which is the moment we know, it's, again, another reason to create a crappy scenario for everybody. You know, if we know we're having a financing problem, there's an issue with financing, everyone needs to know. Everyone needs to know. Because if there's an issue, it's probably going to be an issue at closing. Guaranteed. And when you ask for an extension 2 days prior to close of escrow, no one's happy. I don't care if it's a minor situation. No one's happy. Ever will be happy. So now to the BINSR, then we'll get to the process and all that stuff. So the BINSR, thank goodness it's changed as far as the non-working warrantable items. We're past all that crap. But also, the BINSR is super important. The BINSR is a negotiation tool. The BINSR is how we get our buyers in and out of a contract. Timelines, timelines, timelines. We have to watch them. You have to be on point. You guys know how the BINSR works. We get a lot of questions, and so why I ask the question is, contract date starts the day after acceptance, or the time frame, not the contract date. So contract date today. So if we have an accepted contract date, that's the contract date today. Tomorrow's day one, not today. Because if we go off calendar days, not business days. So calendar days means we count everything. It always ends at midnight. So that BINSR, it's midnight. So when we count out days, you know, I had an agent call and say, well, telling me the 10 days, and she's like, well, yeah, Saturday and Sunday doesn't count. I'm like, who told you that? Who told you Saturday and Sunday it didn't count? Because Saturday and Sunday counts. So obviously, it's calendar days. So tomorrow would be day one. So make sure you count those days out ahead of time so your buyer and the seller knows when to expect the 10-day, when we should be expecting the BINSR, and also for the buyer, when we need to know that we have to submit the BINSR with all the final repairs. So day one, earnest money first, inspection second, termite and home inspection, and then give them the buyer advisory at that point too. Obviously they've signed it, but give them the copy with the live links. They need to do their due diligence. You know, a lot of times I hear agents say, I don't want to open up the can of worms. No, I mean, that's not the right mindset. Is a $6,000 to $10,000 commission on average worth a lawsuit? It's not. You know, and you know, being the brokerage of our size, we see them, and it's always over a little crap that could be prevented. Always is. You know, something with the property. You know, I'm not going to let my buyer buy a piece of crap. If there's something on that home inspection that's alarming, they need to know. If I know something about that neighborhood, I need to tell them. If I don't, I need to show them where to get the information they need to get. At least have them confirm to you that they've looked at the buyer advisory. Everything they need to know for anything about the property for them to find out is there. But guess what? It's their job. It's the buyer due diligence period for a reason. We cannot tell them how many sex offenders are in the neighborhood or show them the link to it. Okay, don't get into that stupid battle back and forth. And it's not our job to explain what the neighbors are like. It's their job. It's not our job to find out crime stats, or it's their job. And it's not like we're rude telling them that. We just need to explain that. Look, you know, our job in the contract is to negotiate, follow the process, facilitate. We are project managers. We really are project managers. We don't sell homes. We do not sell homes. Homes, they sell themselves. We facilitate the transaction. That's all we do. We're not forcing someone to buy a home. A buyer goes into a home, they like it, they love it, they want to buy it, and we facilitate it. We are not in the business of selling homes. I like to be clear on that. We're just not. So I like them to know too. I like to let the buyer know what my job is and what truthfully it is, but that they need to make sure that they're comfortable and they like the home and they're happy with their purchase. And some people don't agree with me on this, but you know what? I don't ever want to be in a situation where I feel bad about someone buying a home from me or facilitating the process, or I feel, you know, I don't ever want to be in that position where it's like, man, you know, just that. I've seen it before where it's like, I don't know if they should buy that home. Well, tell them that. You know, at least you've told them. You know, it's kind of like the, you know, when someone buys a home and it doesn't appraise, which we're going to talk about, and it comes in $5,000 or $10,000 less, let's say. First thing I say is, I don't think you need to pay the difference, nor should you. You've agreed to a contract price, and now you have an appraisal, and that's why there's an appraisal contingency. Never advise your client ever to pay above the appraised value, because then if they're getting a loan, they have to pay out of pocket the difference. They can't finance that difference. They have to pay out of pocket. And if they're insistent upon it, which they have plenty of times, buyers are insistent upon paying the difference, I make them send me an email stating that I've advised them, my real estate agent has advised me not to buy the home, but under my own free will, I'm making the decision. Because guess what happens? When the market takes a dump, or they go into foreclosure, or they lose their job, or suddenly they can't make their house payments anymore, guess who the person is who told them to buy the home? You are. It happens all the time. Suddenly you're now this real estate agent. Why didn't you tell me? Why'd you let me pay over appraised value? Well, I have an email that says otherwise. Again, this is just stuff to check yourself and set expectations for your clients and yourself. You know, protecting yourself in this business is the easiest thing to do, but sometimes we just don't know how to do it or the proper way to do it. So I got a little ahead of myself. So back to the BINSR. So when we submit the BINSR, when I go over the inspection with the buyer, I want them to look and say, what are the gotta haves here? What's the most important stuff on here? I explain to them there are so many minor things that pop up on an inspection, and if you want to ask them to be fixed, my job is to convey that. But if you're okay with some of these things and you want this home really bad, you need to find the things on the inspection that are extremely important to you and that are non-negotiable. And the other things you can get a handyman or somebody to come fix later. You know, the other things they're not gonna ruin ruining the integrity of the home. The home's not gonna crumble, it's not affecting value, they're not major problems. They're just simply maybe aesthetics or a safety hazard that's simply fixing a seal or something like that. But I tell them, I was like, that my job though is to make sure that I negotiate throughout the whole process, including the BINSR. But if you go in and expect them to fix everything on the inspection, just expect a denial. And I'm honest with them about it. I'm like, just expect them to deny it. They will not do it. So you and I together have to look through this and determine what's the important stuff. And that's an easier conversation to have, and that seems to resonate more with them as opposed to sending them the inspection and say, what do you want fixed? All of it, you know, is, okay, I got the inspection, do you have time to talk or meet? Another thing that agents don't do, take the time to go over that stuff together so that you can explain. And again, I'm not there to tell, I'm not a contractor, I'm not a home inspector, but I can at least give my opinion of what should happen. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing illegal.
Okay?
Yeah,
Give your opinion?
absolutely. Yeah, because it's you're not telling them, like, you know, in my opinion, this home inspector said the roof has got some. You probably should get a roofer to come look at it. That's my opinion. We should ask for that stuff. That's for sure.
I had an agent the other day always get the roof certified and the AC unit certified. Is that a good idea to do? I haven't seen it before unless there was an issue in the BINSR and then somebody came out there and double checked it. Is that like a safety thing to do? That might be a smart idea.
What that agent
was representing an attorney.
Okay, probably because it's an attorney and the attorney wanted it. But you know what that agent is doing is it's a CYA. You know, I mean, check yourself, check your ass. It's basically it's a checks and balances for yourself to be certain that you're not going to get in trouble and that you've done everything to advise your client like that. Like if someone says something on the home inspection about the roof, I would say absolutely. Now some some buyers aren't going to care. This buyer or agent could have had something happen in the past. That's not required to do that, just like it's not required to have an AC inspector or a roof inspector or a plumber or electrician to come out. But again, that is part of that where it says in the due diligence period on the buyer advisory, that's where those things come up, to where it's like, if you're going to do any of those items, now's the time to do them during the inspection period. It doesn't hurt. You know, and what you're going to see on the home inspection too is for the plumbing, for the electrical, for the roof, for all those areas, it's going to simply state what you just said. It's going to say, we recommend for further review to have a licensed inspector come out to further evaluate the unit or whatever it is. Now again, you're going to have some buyers that want to have the foundation checked. They want to have radon gas checked. I mean, that's fine. That's their job. They're going to test for lead-based paint because they have kids, and that's totally okay. But you know, when you have these conversations with that buyer advisory up front, and on that day one where I said to do it on day one, that's where you say if you're going to do any other additional inspections, now's the time to order them, because it could take a little longer on some of those to get them done. And you know, never rush that 10 days. You know, if you need to take all the 10 days for your Binzer, take it. You know, if you're done early, I'm one of those guys that says in here too, I don't really like to drag my feet. If I'm done early and the buyer's okay with it and all inspections have been completed and we feel comfortable with our response, submit it. Might as well. Get going. Let's get going in the process. Let's not drag our feet. When you do submit the Binzer, the clock's over. So if you submit the Binzer on day 5, you've submitted your response. Your inspection period is up. So keep that in mind too. But if you're just waiting around 10 days to give, just to wait around, there's no need to wait around for 10 days. So where was I at with the Binzer? Yes, so Binzer. So again, don't waste time. Abide by contract guidelines. That's super important because, you know, we don't want those extra days we needed to be 3 days prior to close of escrow or close to close of escrow if we need them, because then we have to ask for an extension. And going to the whole 45 days, that's why the phrase honor before works beautifully. You know, if we're ready and we're done, honor before is fine. Close honor before. If we're done in 20 days and the lender, assuming the lender can close, great. All parties want to, let's close. But I'd rather have the extra time. I'd rather, just like with that home inspection period, I'd rather have the time we need to complete and do our due diligence and not feel rushed. And I want the buyer to feel really good about the purchase. I don't want there to be any question in their mind or buyer remorse. Okay, so once we've completed the Binzer and we've submitted it to the seller, they have 5 days to respond back to us, okay? So we had 10 days, they have 5 days, and then once they send us, we have another 5 days to respond. So this is where I was saying with the timelines, is that 45 days actually really is only 30 working days, essentially, if you think about it. Take out weekends, you know, take out any holidays that fall in there. It's business hours 9 to 5. It's not after hours like we work. So really you get a lot of time taken out of that. And then if we took 10 days to submit our Binzer, if the seller did take 5 days to respond to us because maybe they were out of town or something, and then because they took 5 days, my buyer's like, well, I'm going to take 5 days to respond. Because it's how people get. It's really weird. Then now we have a 21-day inspection period. That's insane. And it happens. Happens a lot, actually. So 21, we lost 20 of the one, the other 45. Yes?
So it says if you go past the 5 days, your buyer's silence is acceptance.
Yeah, so let's say, just like when we submit the Binzer, if we submit the Binzer on the 11th day, it's too late. Your silence is deemed acceptance. Now, if the seller responds back to us
For what you're asking
for, and we don't respond, that's actually denial, not acceptance. So it's kind of the flip side. So because we the 5 days to respond is obviously for, you know, making sure, again, it's just making sure everyone has time. But, you know, it's the opposite. We think like, oh, well, silence is deemed acceptance. Well, not on that response. It's actually denial of those items.
Wait, Will you say that one more time?
Yeah.
I was writing when you were talking.
Yeah, so when I submit the Binzer, if it's not submitted on the 10th day, the buyer's silence is acceptance of the property.
Okay, okay.
And then when the seller responds, the buyer's silence is denial. They're denying the seller's response. It's not acceptance of
Contract
it.
is
They're not
null
gonna
and
move
void.
forward. Yeah.
You're not gonna move forward.
Okay.
It's an automatic.
Oh.
The reason why is because otherwise it would just go on and on and on and on. There has to be something that stops the clock. So that creates, basically, you're rejecting the seller's response and you're electing to cancel the contract.
Okay.
So now, it doesn't mean you can't reinstate it by both parties saying, well, it was out of town or something happened or whatever the case is. So buyer's silence is deemed acceptance on the submission of the Binzer. Buyer's silence on the seller's response is rejection of their response and canceling the contract. It's just assumed that they're canceling. Does that all make sense?
But do you have to cure to get your earnest money back?
So, anytime at that point, the earnest money should be released, but you have to, in that situation, the best thing to do is to request, because it's still the buyer's earnest money by rejecting it. So the buyer's agent or the buyer would have to request from title the earnest money to be refunded to them, because otherwise title doesn't know that the deal's been canceled.
And the reason why is.
Yeah,
that-
yeah,
Can I ask one more?
of course.
We did 4 out of the 5 requests and set the Binzer over on day 3. You're saying if they don't respond again in 5 days,
So
that
they
they're
have,
not gonna wanna buy the property?
so they have 5 days to respond.
After I send it
Yeah.
again, after they ask
So,
the request?
yeah, when the seller sends their response to your Binzer, the buyer has 5 days. That's the last of the
Okay,
5
that's
days.
the last round.
And if they don't
Okay.
respond to it, they're canceling the contract.
Okay, okay.
So you keep going. Bye.
Yeah, otherwise it goes, hi. Yes,
If you do everything on the Binzer and send it over, they can't
there's
back out?
no, at that point, the response from the seller is acceptance, so the buyer actually doesn't even need to see it at that point. They don't have to sign anything.
They don't have to
Just
sign
like if
Okay.
the buyer sends over the Binzer accepting the premises, seller doesn't have to sign either. It's done.
Okay.
So if I send over my 5 items on the Binzer and the seller accepts those items and sends it back, there's no signature from the buyer needed.
Oh.
It's accepted. The only time it's another response is where you're saying if it's not done and the 5 days go by, it's rejection, or the buyer at that point can elect to cancel or proceed. Yeah, no problem. And anytime you're locked up in that scenario, call the hotline. We're on it in a second. Binzer questions are, believe it or not, the most frequent. So, and again, it's where you can get caught up. You know, it's the whole 5-day this, and they didn't respond, and I'm waiting to hear back. And I thought forever that silence is acceptance. Forever, I would just assume because buyer's silence is deemed acceptance, and it's only on the submission of it. Yeah, because otherwise, you know, again, it's just there's too many things that can happen because when a seller doesn't accept a buyer's request, it's the buyer's opportunity at that point to get out, right? Because they've submitted a request to get out. It's their chance, and they're allowed to get out until there's a conclusion of what happened. And the way to conclude it is the 5 days being up, buyer's out. So if they just decided, I don't want to respond, don't have to respond. You can be a jerk, but you've canceled, essentially. You might as well just check the box and sign it, you cancel and move on. Okay, so then once we're through the Binzer and we've all responded and we've accepted, now we truthfully have a deal. So now the real nitty-gritty can happen. The appraisal can be ordered. The file can be submitted to underwriting. Now I can have conversations with my buyer about the next steps. So one thing we don't do too is talk about the buyer about the next steps, what they have to do in order to complete and successfully close and make sure everything's done in time. So now the conversations of don't buy anything, don't mess with your credit, make sure your lender knows, and you've got a make sure everything is, we have everything we need from you. If there was a checklist that the lender sent to you for items, pay stubs, lingering bank statements, now's the time to say, make sure your lender has everything they've requested, everything. Now as agents, it's our job as agents to say, Mr. or Mrs. Lender, we are through the inspection period, full steam ahead. Now, in most situations, what we're doing is we're sending out a loan status up, or a weekly update to our lender and our title company and the other agent, and then now the lender can send out the LSU to all parties saying that the appraisal's been ordered and the file will be submitted to underwriting, et cetera, all the things that happen on a loan status update. But again, us as agents need to be that project manager. We are truthfully a PM. We manage the whole process. And if someone doesn't do their job, it's our job to make sure they're doing it, right? If we don't have LSU, it's still our job to contact Jim and say, Jim, where's my LSU? Even though Jim will send you the LSU. But it's our job. We have to. Or if the other agent hasn't done their job, it's our job to make sure they're doing it. So that's what a PM does. The PM manages everybody, manages the foreman, manages the superintendent. Those are all the things that we have to do. So that's why I said up front, there's never an excuse. We set the expectations, and it's our job to follow through and make sure that they're done right and make sure that everyone's doing their job.
When you send us a contract, if you let us know when you want that appraisal order, it's super helpful.
Yeah, it's true, it is, because it is our job. So the lender, unfortunately, in these situations with the Binzer and what have you, they're not just automatically updated. They don't know that you've gone through it. So a day, 2, 3, 4 that pass without telling Jim or your lender that we're through the inspection period, we need to order the appraisal, that's, again, on our contract now, that's a lot of valuable time that we've lost that appraisal can be ordered. It's going to take 5 to 7 business days today for an appraisal to get back. That's about the time frame it is right now. 5 to 7 business days, which really is 10 days if you think about it.
I bet you couldn't pay a rush fee, right?
You can.
I mean,
Who wants to incur it? Do you want to pay it?
I mean, I've done it.
It's just because you forgot?
Yeah, I mean,
No,
that's the
like-
thing is if sometimes this, what you're talking about is probably a scenario where everybody wanted to close early, or maybe something happened like a 21-day,
Like that.
like a 21-day Binzer, that crap. Then sometimes you got to do what you got to do. But to Jim's point too, it's who wants to pay that rush fee?
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times in a situation like that, the realtors can come together and pay the rush fee, you know? Or it could have been the buyer or the seller messing up, and the seller or the buyer has to pay that rush fee. But we don't want to, like I said earlier in the class, I don't want to rush. I hate rushing everybody, you know?
The only reason this happened, I'm just throwing it out there, it was a dual close, and you know, she was selling her house and then moving into a condo, and there's all kinds of stuff waiting on the condo certs to come in, you know what I mean? So people were wanting to move in, and so it's just like, fine, I'll pay the $100 so that everybody can close on time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get it. You know,
Yeah.
that's why one thing I said too is that every transaction is different.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
every
no.
scenario, no one deal happens the same way. It's always the same process. It's the same things we have to do, but you know, we can't control the outcome. All we can do is follow guidelines, stay on our game, don't rush everybody, keep time frames, and keep a really close tab. I wrote in here too, keep a close tab on everyone's timelines, time frames, and guidelines, including the lender, including title company. Everyone needs to be accountable in a transaction. You know, there are so many moving parts, that sometimes it's really hard to keep up on it. And if we're not paying attention, one day can mean the world. Oh gosh, one measly day. So, Binzer's done. We've let title know, let the lender know. We're through the inspection period. Appraisal gets ordered. The LSU is out. We've all been updated. We now can sit down with the buyer and talk about guidelines and timeframes of buying the house. Utilities, Cox, CenturyLink, whoever it is. It happens a lot where people forget to tell the buyer, don't forget to get your utilities turned on, and the day before closing, they're like, oh, I didn't turn on the utilities, oh my gosh. And that's a pain, you know, not having power or Cox or anything turned on, because it could take them time. So I tell them right at the inspection period to call utilities, tell them their close of escrow date when they're moving in. That can always be changed. You can always call and extend it, but you can't call the last minute and rush it. They won't rush for you. You can't pay a rush fee to Cox or APS. You just can't. So, and that again, same goes with your seller. Your seller, once we get there too, they need to call ahead, make sure APS knows the close of escrow and when it's going to shut off and turn into the buyer's name. Now, per the contract, the seller has to keep all utilities, including gas, water, on until recording. Not until the house has been recorded, then it can be shut off. The day of closing, power needs to be on and in the seller's name for the final walkthrough and things of that nature. You know, final walkthrough really should happen 3 days prior to close of escrow, but nowadays people are just always rushing through this process. And the reason why the contract has documents to be to title 3 days prior to close of escrow is for that reason, so that the seller can move out, the buyer can do their walkthrough, then you can close. So you have docs, seller can move out, final walkthrough. So the other part we have to explain to our sellers too is that close of escrow, that's not moving day. That's not, close of escrow is they're out of the home day. So make sure on the listing too, they know that and understand that. It happens all the time. Buyer comes, seller's moving out. What the heck is going on? The seller's not out yet. And again, at that point, you know, it's the agent's fault. It truthfully is. And you can't do anything. What are you going to do? And the buyer legally owns the home. Seller's there. I've seen so many nightmares with that. But that is all agents' communication. It's a lack of communication. Yes. No problem. That's what this is for. Ask questions.
Okay, no, wait, so when the docs go to title is when they need me?
So I jumped ahead. I'll get there in a minute. I was just kind of spitballing off what they were
No, I'm
saying.
at the, when do I need to let them know? that they-
Oh,
yeah.
so utilities and all that stuff?
Yeah, I got that.
You're gonna let the
Done.
buyer know to call Cox and APS,
Right,
all that
right.
stuff, right when the inspection period is done. So when the bins are
I
complete.
got that part, no, having them move out of the house before. they
Oh,
close it. So that-
So
Let me just double check that one.
the
again.
seller technically should be out of the home 3 days prior to close of escrow.
3 days prior, okay, yeah, okay.
Yeah. So that's why documents are on the contract to be the escrow 3 days prior. Because once the documents are at escrow, then the sellers,
No.
then they're, you know, then you're okay with moving out. They're that's the whole point of it is they know that we're gonna close. Once
They
docs are
shouldn't
there,
move.
we're to the finish line.
They should.
So the close, that's why it's there. What I was saying was this
Oh.
seller move-out day is not close of escrow day. That's not. And part of that, again, that is the listing agent's fault for not explaining clearly to the seller that you have to be out before close of escrow.
Okay.
Now, if we don't have, the docs are not there, do you still suggest they move out 3 days prior to?
No. And that is where you cure
Yes.
the buyer side. So I got a little ahead of myself. I will get there, I promise, because we're gonna discuss that scenario and specifically. So once the appraisal's been ordered, 5 to 7 days to come back, appraisal comes back. Most scenarios, the appraisal's gonna come in at or a little over value. If it gets cut, which we've been seeing happen, a couple things can happen. And this is, so try not to confuse this because this is where a lot of people get confused on how it works. What is required, what has to happen, whose fault or who does what for this and that. If the appraisal comes back cut, that is why the appraisal comes in under value, under contract value. So let's say we're at 190 and the appraisal comes back at 180. That means the appraisal's been cut. It means it didn't appraise at the agreed contract price of the contract. So if it gets cut, then the appraisal contingency exists for a purpose. The buyer now has an out, okay? They have a loan, number one, so the loan contingency will be done if something doesn't get renegotiated, or the appraisal contingency. They can't get a loan on a home that they went under contract for 190 and they have an appraisal at 185. The lender won't, they will lend on it, but they're now lending at 185, not 190, because that's the appraised value. So that is where new negotiation has to come into play. So your buyer can simply back out. I don't want to buy the home. That's their right. It's an appraisal contingency. They can back out of the house and get their earnest money back. The seller can drop the price to the appraised value, contract price, appraised value, onward and upward. Buyer can pay the difference, buyer and seller can split the difference. Those are the only things that can truthfully happen. Most situations, assuming it's not a huge cut in value, the sellers has to come up with it. And that's what I always advise my buyers. The seller, you know, that's great, we agreed to a contract price, but this isn't a $4 million home, this is a $250,000 home, you're gonna drop the price or we're out, you know, plain and simple. You know, and most times the seller does, and onward and upward. And usually the buyer's not just backing out. Go ahead.
So let's say buyer offers $245 on a house because he wants the seller to pay for the closing costs,
Mm-hmm.
which then puts the loan at $236 or something. The appraised value is going to be over their offer or over the loan amount after they pay their down payment.
So whatever the purchase price is where the appraised value has to come in. Is that the question you're asking?
No,
So-
I'm asking, is the appraisal based on the offer they gave or the loan amount?
Appraisal is always based on the contract price, which is the offer, accepted offer. It's never on the loan amount. The loan amount is simply what they're borrowing from the bank. The loan amount's based on the contract, the home price. That's what it's based on. Are you following me?
Yeah, kind of.
So if someone made an offer for $240,000 on a home, and they asked for $5,000 in concessions, that has nothing to do, the concessions have nothing to do with your contract price. It still is $240,000. So if the appraisal comes in at $235,000, that's now the new price the lender is going to roll off of. So all the loan amount value is if they're putting 3.5% down on FHA or 5% down or 10, 20 on a conventional, that's the loan amount. So they're basing the loan amount off appraised value in the end, which is the loan to value ratio. So for the lending purposes, the appraisal has to come in at contract value, which is whatever that offer price that was submitted was accepted and agreed upon. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Okay, so the loan amount is, they're not basing an appraisal ever off loan amount. That's how they determine loan to value ratio. So 80%, 90%, 95%. That's basically the exposure in which the lender is lending upon the purchase price or appraised value. So that's why there's purchase price and appraised value. Because what happens sometimes is you may have a purchase price of $240,000 and the appraisal comes in at $243,000. But they never can lend over the purchase price. So that's why that purchase price is based on that appraised value. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question, or did you have a different question? Because when you were saying the concessions or the closing costs, they never net that out, right? It's never like, oh, well, it's $240,000, but you asked for $4,000, so it's $236,000. They never net that out. There's never a true net to it. It's always the agreed
But it
sale
might be
price
open to renegotiation
if the appraisal gets cut.
Because they'll offer above the asking a lot of the time because they can't afford the closing costs.
Right.
So then you're in the issue of like, well, I listed the house really well within market,
Mhm.
so it might not appraise.
Right. That's a different question. So, yeah, if you're listed at $240,000 and you make an offer at $245,000 with 5,000 concessions, so to cover it, it still has to appraise at $245,000.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the purchase
Okay,
price is based on
so
appraisal
the
value.
listing price is $190 and it comes in at $185,
Mhm.
and the buyer can back out. Why would the buyer back out if it's less money?
Because the reason the buyer be backing out is the seller's not going to drop the price. The seller now has to drop the price to that
Agreed.
appraised value for them to get a loan.
Okay, because the bank will not go over the purchase
And the buyer
price.
would have to pay.
And the buyer would have to pay the difference
Oh,
if they
good.
decided to buy it still.
Okay.
And we never advise the buyer to do that. And the reason why, again, and a cash deal wouldn't matter for the appraised value, but this is all contingent upon the loan. So if it got cut by $5,000,
Yeah.
the lender will still do the loan, but what's gonna happen is, it's gonna be $5,000 additional dollars the buyer has to bring to the closing table. And no buyer is gonna do that when they have an appraised value at $185. So basically they're saying, someone's telling me this house is worth $185, I'm still gonna pay $190 though. Follow me?
Who's saying that?
I'm just saying in
Yeah.
general, if I have a contract price of $190 and it's cut to $185,
Yeah.
and the buyer still is going to pay 190, that means they're paying $5,000 over and above what they're getting for their loan to buy the house. Because the lender is only going to lend based on 185. No, so regardless of the 190 now, that's out the door. 185 is your new value. So that's why the seller has to drop the price to 185 for the loan to even work. Because in most situations, the buyer's not even have additional 5,000. You know,
That's what they ask for closing costs.
yeah. Well, and that's true. But even then, with closing costs, it doesn't matter because the closing costs are separate. This is above and beyond costs and everything. So they're gonna have to pay closing costs, their down payment, and now $5,000.
How long does a seller have to, respond? So like if it's undercut, like in
5 days.
what if they don't respond or don't?
So, well, it's really if in the situation where the buyer sends over an addendum, that's really so the appraisal comes in, the buyer has 5 days to respond.
The buyer.
So it's nothing to do with the seller.
Nothing to-
So
okay.
within 5 days of receipt, buyer has to give their answer, which is an addendum to drop the purchase price or whatever it is, right? If the seller doesn't respond, it's over. There's no time frame for the seller to respond
Okay,
to
so
that.
just for our buyer.
Yeah, at that point, they'd ask for their earnest money to come back. Yes, over here.
Yeah, I have a appraiser coming out today at 4, and I sent comps over last night. Should I be doing that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, and how many comps should I send? Is there a certain way, because I'm new at it, but I
There's
just found 6.
as many as you can give them.
How detailed am I supposed to get? It was right in the same square footage. I just put the address and the sale price.
As many comps as you possibly can give him to support value, I'd say. There's really not a specific number that you have to give. If there's 10 perfect comps that support your value, send them all 10. Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're not going to have even 6. Sometimes you'll have 1 or 2, you know?
Okay.
So
Is there
as
a time
specific
frame?
as you want to.
Is there a time frame on the comp? Like some of them were 2017, so there was a ton of action.
Lenders,
So-
you're not 2017, then you can't.
Yes,
Yeah.
it's-
Okay, so,
Yeah.
I mean, to
A
myself, look
lender,
like a new agent when I sent that over.
Yeah, an
Okay.
appraiser is going to be looking at anywhere between 3 and 6 months
Okay,
for comps that they'll consider. Anything over 6 months, it'd be hard to get them to consider that. They'd have to have literally nothing to go off of,
okay.
and then they'd have to adjust off that. Yes.
If the buyer agent doesn't give the seller agent an addendum for dropping the price, does that mean the buyer's accepting?
If 5 days go by, then they've accepted it. Yes, and then you've got an agent that's screwed up big time. It's probably going to be eating $5 grand.
Now, is it 5 business days or 5?
It's 5 calendar days. It's always calendar days. Nothing's ever business days on the contract.
Is there anything business days?
No, nothing's business days. Yeah, always. Yeah, that's the reason they did that is to eliminate confusion on the
But you
contract.
can extend the appraisal contingency time?
You can extend anything that you want. You have to ask though within that 5 days.
Yeah, okay.
And it's happened a couple times here and this is where a seller's being a jerk and they enforced it, where the buyer never gave their answer because they didn't think they had to, because the listing or the buyer's agent never said anything about it. They just said, seriously. And 5 days went by and,
Wow.
you know, one of the ones was like a $10,000 difference and the other one was like $1,500. And the one with the $10,000 difference ended up being a really, really ugly scenario where the buyer tried to sue the agent. That agent was not ours, thank God. The $1,200 one was, the agent was able to, they just covered the difference for him. They can give a concession. But again though, it was a concession on costs. That money still had to be out of for down payment, had nothing to do. So thank God there was loan costs to cover it washed out essentially. But the agent that did it with our listing that we had, I don't know what ended up happening with it, but it was a pretty ugly scenario. The buyer was super pissed. I mean, obviously, rightfully so. They just thought that it got cut and they can go on and get their earnest money back, but they never responded to the seller and told them that they were backing out and canceling. So it says clearly on the contract, but because of where it is in the contract, it can be missed. So just keep that in mind. 5 days from receipt of that appraisal, you have to give the seller notice, if it's cut, what you're going to do. Any other questions on that?
Wait, so if it's higher,
The Doesn't
Buyer
matter.
gets a deal.
Then you got a deal and you're good to go. Yeah, hire's good. That's what we want. We want hire. Yeah. So yeah, that's usually doesn't even happen these days, but if it does, it's maybe like $1,000, like a couple $1,000. I mean, I've seen some of them come pretty significantly higher, but that's usually a situation where someone's getting it for a deal or it's a invest or something or whatever. But yeah, comes in higher, you can do cartwheels, and your client should be really happy at that point.
Unless you're the seller.
Oh yeah, if you're the seller, you're like, damn it. Then you're pissed at your agent. What were you thinking?
$1,000.
Okay, so past the appraisal, now we've got, I put on there too, just so you know, the buyer has 5 days to make a decision. It's at the bottom of page 2 on there for that appraisal. So once we've gone through the appraisal contingency, been through all that stuff, and we're past that, we're now to the point where pretty much all contingencies have been lifted, okay? So when all contingencies have been lifted except the financing contingency, we need to give the utility notice. That's what I was saying before. I got a little ahead of myself. The utility notice for everybody. Now, 3 days prior to close of escrow, documents are required to be at title, no exceptions. If documents are not at title 3 days prior to close of escrow, you have to issue a cure notice. This is when you're representing the seller. Okay, so if it's your listing, you're representing the seller, I don't care what their excuse is, you issue a cure that covers your bases, that covers your seller, it covers your ass, okay? And I can't say this more because one of the big mistakes too is we never cure. We always forget to cure, or we don't know to cure, or we just are not thinking straight. Or you're talking with the listing agent, oh, docs will be there tomorrow, okay, cool. No, I don't care if they're gonna be there tonight at 10 p.m. If they're not there by 5 p.m., 3 days prior to close of escrow, that cure notice needs to go out.
So what if it's 3 days and they'll be there tomorrow if they're not there
I
tomorrow?
don't care.
Those 2 days, we can still cure and even
You
though
cure
it's,
that day. That same day, that day they're not there, that third day, 3 days prior to close of escrow, they're not there, you cure that day. Because if docs come the next day, the cure notice is off. It doesn't matter. Because all the cure notices says, fix this problem within 3 days. And if they send docs the next day, then they fix the cure. And you can most likely still close on time, but you may have to get an extension. But again, what the issue is and where the big problems happen is when you don't cure. Because here's what happens. If documents aren't to title 3 days prior to close of escrow and you don't send a cure notice and the close of escrow comes, what did you just do now? In order to cancel or enforce the contract, you have to issue a cure notice. Now you've given them 3 extra days to perform. So your seller can't get the earnest money until that third day. So where you think your seller's gonna get the earnest money because they didn't perform, not anymore. You waited now to close of escrow, and when you cure them, it's a 3-day cure. Now they have 3 days to fix the issue. So if you're trying to protect your seller or your buyer and enforce based on timelines and guidelines of the contract, you have to cure and do those things within the time it tells you to. And the contract goes through all that. I mean, you're gonna, anytime something isn't met or there's a breach, you cure them. Anytime. Just like with earnest money, I said at the beginning. If earnest money is not deposited within 24 hours of contract acceptance, cure them. I don't care if it seems rude. I don't care if they told you it's gonna be there tomorrow. Then if they drop it off tomorrow, the cure is done. It's null and void, it's over with. There's never be scared to cure. You have to do it.
What is cure?
So there's a cure, so in ZIP forms, there's what's called a cure period notice. A cure notice is anytime a buyer or seller is in breach of contract of the terms, you issue what's called a cure notice. This gives them 3 days to fix or cure, is how they call it, the issue. So in a circumstance like this, the closing documents are not to title, within 3 days prior to close of escrow, you're gonna issue a cure notice. That gives them 3 days to get docs to title. And if they don't get docs to title or fix any other cure or issue within the contract within those 3 days, the buyer now, or seller, is either one, is in full breach of contract and is subject to loss of earnest money. Now on the seller side, a breach of contract, again, releases the seller, and on the buyer side, releases it to the buyer.
Can you cure LSUs?
It technically, per the contract, it states that you're required to get a loan status update. curing the lender is, it's not really gonna do much. It would just be one of those things, send it to me now. You could cure the other side, the buyer, the realtor, the buyer's side, but if they're having an issue with the lender, it's hard to, it's one of those items you don't.
But I would think, can you back out though, since if you cure them
If
and
you,
see issues?
it gives you an issue it gives you a reason essentially to back out, but at that point too, depending upon the situation, you probably can get out for other reasons as well. If they're not providing, like at that point when you're asking for, like once you're through the inspection period and you're curing for an LSU, I mean, again, it's per the contract, you're allowed to do it and it gives your person an out. So really is only giving the seller an out. At that point, why does the seller want an out, So it's just one of those, it's a weird thing to cure for. I would say prior to the inspection period being up, yeah, it's a definite curable item. Again, I'm not saying not to. Cure, if any time there's a breach, the way to do it right and legally is by curing. So I'm almost out of time, like 2 minutes, so really quick, and I'll go over the time frames. So the reason why the 45 days, we have what's called the CD. Sounds like a couple people here may not know what the closing disclosure is or seen it yet. The closing disclosure is super important. And how the closing disclosure works is the reason why we ask for more time, and the reason why we ask for, especially the docs to be 3 days prior to close of escrow, before those docs can even come, there's what's called a closing disclosure. The closing disclosure is an itemization of costs and fees that are issued to the buyer. And what happens is the buyer has a total of 3 days to review that closing disclosure. So if a closing disclosure is issued today, tomorrow, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, that's the third day, the earliest day from today, if they're ready to go, that the buyer could get closing documents, the title would be Monday. And that'd be almost close to impossible. So again, the reason why we ask for these time frames is because realistically, yeah, it's asking 3 days prior to close of escrow, but really it's 7+ days prior. The loan has to be ready to go in order to make that deadline. Because in order to even get docs to title, there has to be a closing disclosure. And the closing disclosure, you cannot get around the 3 days. You cannot. They have to have it. If it's delivered today, tomorrow's day 1, Saturday's day 3, you can't count Sunday. Monday is the first day. And on that rescission period on the closing disclosure, you can't count holidays. That's the only time frame, because it has nothing to do with the contract. It's totally separate of the real estate contract. That's the only time frame where they're going off a separate type of time structure, which is like a rescission period. If you've ever refied your home, the rescission period gives you 3 days to review the documents. It does not count holidays and it does not count Sunday. But you can't close on a Saturday. So if it's today and Thursday, Friday, Saturday, it's not the first day. It'll roll the next business day. Then documents could be sent to title. So see how that time frame, you lose all those days. So if you're cutting it to the wire the whole time, you're just not going to have enough time. You will not have enough time to get there. Does that make sense, everybody? Does you follow me on that?
Say it one more time.
So do you know what the closing disclosure is?
We just said it.
Yeah, but I mean, do you know, like, in general, what it is?
It shows the cost and fees.
Right, and the lender issues it,
And the
okay?
lender issues it.
It's on the title side, it's nothing to do with us.
Oh.
Okay, so that's why it's separate of the actual contract itself. That's why the time frames on it are separate too. So the closing disclosure has to do with the loan, and before closing docs can be issued to title or sent to title,
Yes.
they have to have that closing disclosure. And they get it, if they got the closing disclosure today, by law, it's 3 days. They have to review it before you can even
3 business days.
it's 3 days, but they have a time frame. It's not business days.
Oh.
Tomorrow's day 1, Friday's day 2, Saturday, which is not a business day, is day 3. So it's like rescission periods can count weekends, meaning Saturday, excluding Sunday and holidays. Okay? So there's what's called a TRID wheel, and the lender can give you a TRID wheel, but anytime the closing disclosure goes out, those time frames you can go over with the lender. You're going to know what is the earliest date, and they're going to know. But the reason why I'm telling you is for the contract itself. Because if you try to squeeze out a 25-day close of escrow, it's gonna be very difficult if there's a loan involved because you have TRID now to abide by, which is closing disclosure, 3-day rescission, then they can close.
Oh,
So really you're adding a week on to what it could be. Yeah, and these are things you don't know unless you've gone through a transaction, or things that you don't know unless otherwise taught. But when you get there, go over it with the lender, find the time frames, call our hotline, our broker hotline here, never assume. Make sure you always watch and like examine your timelines on the contract. And anytime you think it's probably gonna be cutting it close, it is. Seriously. And again, I was saying before, there's nothing worse than having to ask for an extension the day of, the day before, 2 days prior to close of escrow, because they don't have to give it to you. That's the other thing too. No, you ask for an extension, and even though we know we're gonna close, if the seller really wanted to be an asshole, they can deny the extension, breach a contract, take your earnest money. Hey, if it's a hot market and they've got backup offers and you've been fouling up the whole time, you've been a terrible agent, the buyer's been a nightmare, they could do it. And again, I'm not saying that to freak you out or to, and I'm not saying to screw anyone over.
Right.
I'm just saying you have to watch, mind your P's and Q's, because if you ran into a seller that legitimately wanted to do that, they could. Because you can't, the appraisal contingency's met, the financing contingency's met, you have title doc, you have docs the title. If you're just late and you're breach of contract, you're done. You did not close on time, the seller does not have to extend. I know, it's crazy. And sometimes you can find a crazy client and you don't want to have to deal with that. And that just sucks if you represent the buyer and suddenly they've lost earnest money over something like that. So again, time frames, guidelines, set expectations. When in doubt, call the hotline. Don't assume. If you have questions, that's why we're here. Ask us. We're here to help you do more and close more business and walk you through these things. We don't want you to get into a bind. We want you to be able to close the deal smooth and get referrals and high-five each other at closing.
one last question. Do not do pre-possession. This is liability.
Yes. A lot in the past, 2002 to 2008, it was such a wild market. Yeah, we'll close, it doesn't matter. There was no fear of closing. So pre-possession is the buyer taking possession of the home prior to closing escrow.
Oh.
That is a awful thing to do. Avoid it when you can. It's gonna pop up where someone wants to go get a hotel. No. Just like post-possession. That's when the seller stays in the home after they've closed. All it does is open you up for liability. House burns down, it's not that person's home anymore. A mover chops their arm off, moving stuff in, it's not their home anymore. They decide they don't want to move out, now you gotta kick someone out of your house. They ruin something, I'm talking anything. A kid drowns in the pool, it's not their home anymore. Now they're liability. So we've seen every nightmare possible happen with post or pre-possession. That's where all the crazy, weird stuff happens. That's where it's like stuff you never thought would happen to a home happens. It floods. It rains that night on a monsoon, and the house floods, and they're like, it's your house now. You know what I mean? Or it's not your home. I don't want to buy it. I took pre-possession. I'm not. There's so many. It's awful. It's just the reason why the contract exists. There is no pre or post possession agreement that exists out there for a reason, because it's not, the contract is close of escrow, not pre or post. So leave it to agents and leave it to us to try to make it jiggy and make things work that shouldn't. So again, anytime you're ever in doubt, please call the broker hotline. That's why we created it. That's what it's there for. That's what we're here for, is to help eliminate and mitigate risk. That's why we have the coolest and best brokers here, is to make sure that you don't. So you're never going to get it in just one class or one transaction. Have you done a transaction yet?
No.
So, and that's fine. I'm glad you're here. Believe it or not, how many people don't even come to this class and try to make their way through a transaction? But it'll take multiple deals to get it figured out, and that's totally okay. No one ever says you have to figure it out overnight. In fact, it's going to take time. I expect it to. But come to more of these classes, educate. Come to the Binzer class. come to John's contract classes, which is usually every other workshop Wednesday. They're super helpful. As boring as it sounds, read the contract. Like, try to truthfully memorize the sections. It helps big time. I mean, it took me time, you know, going through this. And this is like years of, you know, mistakes and crap and people doing crazy things you'd never thought they do, that they do. So, but yeah, any other questions?
Thank you.
You're very welcome. You bet.
Thank
You guys staying for the next class?
you. Yeah.
Yeah.